Punishment of children is commonly used in the home and at school. In everyday life, we hope that punishment will change behavior, but we usually have many motivations. We want punishment to teach a child a lesson, to send a message, make sure there is a reasonable penalty for some action, teach justice and right and wrong, and have the child take responsibility for one's actions. It is not clear if punishment can accomplish all of those goals, but they are reasons we as parents commonly use to explain why we use punishment. Perhaps it is not a surprise, but the research is clear about the limits of punishment. Specifically, punishment is not very effective for developing behaviors parents wish to develop in their children, or for eliminating the behaviors the parents want to stop. There are variations of punishment that can be effective, yet how they are implemented and used differs considerably from what usually happens in the home. In this lesson, I cover the major direct effects and side effects associated with punishment. In light of negative outcomes, I also discuss alternative ways of proceeding to change behavior and to be more effective. Let us begin with the basics, because they are not so basic after all. I use the term punishment to refer to any consequence that follows behavior and decreases or is intended to decrease the likelihood of that behavior in the future. Thus, the focus today is on the single issue of whether punishment actually changes behavior of the child in any way. There are three main types of punishment. The first type is presenting something undesirable or negative after a behavior. Familiar examples would be reprimands, shouting, or hitting a child. In each case, the child does the undesirable behavior and something is presented. The second type is taking away something positive after a behavior. Examples would be taking away an activity, a privilege, or some planned positive event. Timeout or isolating an individual from current activity is included here too. In point programs, taking points away for some misbehavior would be another example. The third type is requiring some effort or some task that has to be performed. This usually consists of using a chore or cleaning up something as a penalty. An example would be if a child breaks something, he would have to clean up the mess as the penalty or work on some other chore. Despite the many different ways of punishing a child, there are three common effects that are documented in research. First, punishment stops the behavior in the moment due to the interruption and sometimes the startle value of the punishment. That part may not be surprising to you. Second, the effects of punishment are not enduring beyond that moment. The number of times the child will engage in that behavior in the future usually is not changed. In other words, the effects are immediate but not enduring. Sometimes parents believe punishment teaches the child a lesson that will change behavior in some lasting way. It turns out that's not very likely to be true. Third, and finally, parents occasionally escalate or increase the punishment intensity, and that does not make the punishment any more effective. So parents may go from a little reprimand to something much louder, or the parent may go from a shout to a threat and then maybe a hit, or the parent may go from a little hit to a lot of hits or much harder hits. It may seem natural to escalate and increase. Parents can be frustrated because the punishment did not have the desired effect, so one moves to a more severe form. Increasing or escalating the intensity of punishment increases crying and pain associated with the punishment, but it doesn't increase the effectiveness or teach the behaviors you would like. Thus, if you punish a child for screaming at his sister, that will not make him speak nicely to her more often, and it may not even reduce the screaming. The best way to eliminate screaming is by praising instances of speaking nicely. Punishment often produces negative side effects, and negative side effects refer to consequences we probably do not want at all, but occur if punishment is relied upon too heavily. These are side effects because they are not related to changing the desired behavior. Here are 4 of the most common negative side effects. First, there are emotional reactions on the part of the child who is punished. This may include crying, arguing, or even striking a parent. A parent might even say, "You should be upset after what you just did." However, being upset is not related to the effectiveness of punishment, and making the child more upset with a stronger punishment does not change behavior or eliminate the problem. A second negative side effect is escape and avoidance. When a parent delivers more punishment than praise, children often try to distance themselves from the person who punished them. They do this physically and psychologically, and this strains the relationship between you and your child. Escape and avoidance can come up in another way. Once in a while, a parent or teacher uses an activity as punishment, but we want that activity to be something the child likes. For example, at school, punishment may consist of extra homework, staying after school, and even exercising. We do not want these used as punishers at all, because we want children to like or at least have a positive reaction to those activities. Using them as punishers will make children want to escape from them and will make them aversive rather than positive. A third negative side effect is an increase in aggressive behavior. When a person punishes, the child is more likely to retaliate by hitting the punisher. This is especially likely when the punishment involves physical contact in some way. For example, if a parent uses hitting as a form of punishment, that'll lead to aggression. If the parent holds the child tightly for a few minutes as a form of punishment, that too is likely to lead to aggression. And if the parent tries to physically force or take a child to time out, the parent is much more likely to get hit. The common theme of this third side effect is touching or any effort to use force during punishment is likely to have a child strike back physically at you. The fourth side effect is the modeling effect. In other words, the parent's punishment technique models behavior that the child tends to use with his peers. Thus, parents who use hitting as a form of punishment are likely to have children who hit their peers when they are angry or upset with them. The same goes for parents who use reprimands or shouting. Their children are likely to scold and yell at their peers when they're mad. In summary, to this point, the direct effects of punishment are not too promising. There's not much impact on the behavior beyond stopping the behavior at that moment. And the indirect effects include a set of negative side effects that most of us would not want for our children. Yet there is an effective way to use punishment, and these are the steps to use punishment effectively. First and most obvious is decide the behavior you want to decrease. It's usually worth writing it down just to be clear. Second, and as important, is to decide the behavior you would like to replace that other behavior. This is the positive opposite or appropriate or pro-social behavior that you want. For example, you want to stop your child from swearing. Then the replacement behavior or positive opposite would be speaking nicely and without these words. The positive opposite behavior is even more important to write down because the effectiveness of changing swearing depends on you having a really good idea of what those opposite behaviors are that you will be attending to and praising. Third, decide how you will reward that replacement or positive opposite. You could use praise, attention, or points, but something is needed that regularly follows the behavior you want to develop. The more times you praise the positive opposite, the more rapidly you can eliminate the behavior you do not want. Notice how I have not even mentioned punishment at all. In an effective behavior change program, especially when the goal is to eliminate the behavior, the main strategy is to develop the positive opposite by going through these first 3 steps. Fourth, decide on the punishment that will be used. This could be timeout from reinforcement, loss of a privilege, loss of points if you're using a point program, or even a mild reprimand. The keys here are keeping the punishment mild and brief. Mild, because more severe punishment is not more effective in changing behavior. It just brings out more negative side effects. The punishment should be brief for the same reason. Longer punishment is not more effective than shorter ones. Out of frustration, a parent may tell a child she cannot do this activity for a week or 2, but taking away the activity for 1 day or 2 would be equally effective. Selecting a mild and brief punishment should be done ahead of time to avoid impromptu punishments. The impromptu punishments tend to be long and severe. Finally, check on the program to make sure the positive reinforcement for the positive opposite outweighs the mild punishment for the behavior you want to suppress. For example, if you gave your child timeout 4 times this week, it would be critical to administer attention for the positive opposite at least twice as many times. There is no real number one can give, but it is important to reinforce the positive opposite much more often than punishment is being used. De-emphasizing punishment when one wants to get rid of some undesirable behavior suggests a very different way of thinking. So let us quickly recap these steps again. First, select the behavior you want to decrease. Second, identify the positive opposite of that behavior. Third, decide how you reward the positive opposite behavior. Fourth, decide on mild and brief punishment to use ahead of time. And 5, make sure instances of the praise greatly outnumber the instances of the punishment. So let me summarize what I have noted. There are some basic features of punishment related to its effects and side effects. As I mentioned at the start, parents often have many reasons to punish a child, but in regard to actually decreasing the behavior, punishment actually isn't much help at all. Furthermore, punishment often has negative side effects, such as emotional reactions and aggression on the part of the child, efforts to escape and get away from the person who punishes, and modeling effect in which you teach your child how to punish others in his or her life. The negative side effects include many more problems if physical punishment like spanking is used as the primary way to discipline children. That is why there's a separate lesson just on spanking and hitting children. So the overriding question might be, is there a place for punishment? Yes. Very mild and brief punishment can be helpful when that punishment is a supplement or minor part of a larger program to reinforce behavior. Developing the positive opposite accompanied with mild and brief punishment can lead to enduring change, but the emphasis has to be on the positive opposite. In this lesson, we have combined a couple of tools, building positive opposites and mild punishment. Please watch other lessons on punishment to get a more complete picture of the impact punishment can have and effective alternatives.